I'm here with Grego Mawson, who is Napier City Councillor. Kia ora, Grego, and thanks for joining me.
G'day. Good to be here, Andrew. Thank you.
Thanks, Grego. It's good to see you again. Now, this year has been quite a tough time for all councils around the country, and in particular Hawke's Bay. And you've finished up the long-term plan process, should I say? How did that go?
Yeah, I mean, it was a tough time for us on council, and again, indeed, acknowledging the other councils around the place, just with everything that's happened, especially with the cyclone and so forth. To come out to our community with over 20% rates rise was quite awful. And yeah, so to try and get that down was quite a hard thing to do. So we did manage to get it under the 20, but it's still higher than anyone wants. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's quite interesting. People sort of look at things, Andrew, with a lens of, things have gone up a little bit, right, in the supermarkets and so forth. But someone said to me, and I can't coin this myself, but we're not buying milk or bananas. So things like, for instance, bridges and things, when they've gone up 36%, and that's overall a reflection in the last couple of years. That's overall a reflection of how the industry is with both, infrastructure and so forth. So to get the things done that we needed to get, let alone the cyclone behind us, and all the recovery from that has been quite a huge impact. So yeah, I mean, we've forecasted around that 10 or so the next rates round for this next annual plan, but hopefully you can do some further trimming to be able to maybe get that down even further. But I must say, Andrew, a lot of the time, I mean, I've been on the front page for my inability to get my numbers right. So I'm a personal trainer by trade. So full disclosure that I'm not great with numbers. Everything's always two more. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's and I mean, no, I mean we're ratepayers ourselves, so it's extremely difficult to go out and say, right, this is just the way it is. But I think it's reflective of the whole country that we've seen quite high rates rises across the board, and those cities or towns that haven't, they've really sort of they're not going to do a hell of a lot on their work program from that point on, for the next year or so, just to cushion things for their ratepayers. But yeah, quite hard. But yeah, also being bold and saying, well, we could have loan funded a lot of this, Andrew, and that just sets ratepayers up for so much more in the long run. So,
Now, part of the reason for the situation your council is in, and it's been an admission of the mayor and the council, is of underinvestment in infrastructure, and that in years gone by. You obviously that was before your time, but do you agree with that? Do you think that you are now sort of carrying the problems of previous councils, and who should have sorted out the pipes and the infrastructure and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think out of the tragedy that was Havelock North crisis, the water crisis there, I think that if we try and turn some negatives into positives, it did highlight the underinvestment by not only Hastings and ourselves, but councils across New Zealand, that they did tend to underinvest in that infrastructure. And you're rightly so, you've said that I've kind of inherited this, so to speak, and we've often talked about it in the previous term was legacy issue. But we've just got to get on with it, and if there's one thing, again, that with the three waters highlighted that, we're ahead of the game here in Hawke's Bay. So obviously through Havelock North, we had to do a lot of work, and we looked at that sort of that regional model just for scale of efficiency. But that doesn't necessarily bind us into that. Certainly with the current government's way of looking at things, we still have the ability, if we choose to go it alone and not necessarily be as impacted as the other councils, so to speak, our neighbours. So yeah, I do agree with you, Andrew. Yeah, it's certainly something that has been highlighted with most territorial authorities in New Zealand.
Now, you talk about next year being a 10% increase, and you hoping to get that even lower. Is there danger it could be another 20 though? Do you see that? Because just the nature of the unpredictable nature of how things are and the costs, as you say, and sort of emergencies and natural disasters and that. Is there potential that you could be looking at another high rates increase next year?
Well, I mean, that's that crystal ball, isn't it, Andrew? At the end of the day,
yeah.
just a few key things. And the reality is, would we have come out with a 20% rates rise if we didn't have Cyclone Gabrielle?
Yeah.
I think you and I both know the answer to that. It wouldn't have been that high at all.
Yeah.
And then, we sort of reflect on what has happened. And whilst it, for some people, it's over a year ago now, but there are still some things out there that haven't been fixed. And I don't mean on a council basis. I mean, just in general, some people are still going through their homes, and not having that settled out of that cyclone. And one of the things that a lot of people don't realise is what insurance doesn't pay for. And our constituents would look at us and go, what have you done? If we were to say, not try and build back better. And a good example of that would be the wastewater treatment plant. A lot of that stuff, that work that we did on there needed to be funded, simply because the insurance we're just going to replace like for like. So we needed to sort of actually say, well, look, if we didn't fix that up to the standard that our community would expect, and a disaster was to happen again, and that same thing would happen, our wastewater treatment plant not work for 2.5 months, that's just, we couldn't do that. So yeah, there were extra things. If we have a disaster, who knows, Andrew? I'd like to think that we're on track to be hopefully around that sort of that number. But I want to be part of a council that's bold enough to say, look, this is the reality. We don't necessarily want to drag this thing out a long time for the sake of an extra percent. And I think that's what we did this time. We could have loan funded some of this and got it down to around that sort of 18. But there wasn't, we put that out to the community, and they were kind of like, well, actually, I think it's probably worthwhile taking the hit now for that extra percent as opposed to paying it off for additional years. So, I don't have the crystal ball. I'd like to think that we're going to be on the 90 there. So, yeah.
Now, you mentioned...
not to dilute... Sorry, Andrew, not to dilute things, but basically a percent of rates works out, I believe, to be around $40 a year per ratepayer. So whilst is it $40? It's about a cup of tea a cup of coffee a year, a week. So I'm way off with the $30, but it's not necessarily, it sounds bad, but it's not necessarily too bad for the sake of saying, let's not carry that on for decades.
Well, some ratepayers might find even that $40 quite hard. But just in terms of savings, you mentioned trying to find savings. Are you comfortable that the council has found all the savings that it can make across everything?
Well, I think that's a good question, Andrew. I think it's one that needs a lot of thought and time. So we didn't necessarily have the latter to be able to go right through line by line to then say this is the best that we could possibly do. The government have sort of highlighted a lot of they're cutting back and stuff, and if I'm to be frank, I think that we've kind of been a bit of finger pointing on there, bit of scapegoat from the government to sort of point the finger at us. However, there are some things I think that we can, with the time now, moving into this annual plan, we could probably do some more. But I mean, it's very much something that the staff have to come back with, obviously, because it's operational to a certain degree, and give us an idea of what we can try and save within the budgets.
No,
so we dig deep, but how deep do we dig as governance? It's like, do we go through line by line? Governance is one of those things where this ship, so you know how it works.
Yeah. So now one of the things you've set in motion, and there's a bit of controversy around these organisations, or the council-controlled trade organisations, and Napier has set one up. Is this the magic thing, or the silver bullet that's going to save everything, that's going to produce more investments and that? Or is it taking democracy away from the people?
That is a very good question. And I think if you look from the outside in without necessarily having a good nous of business, I mean, admittedly, I've got a small business. It doesn't mean I know everything about business. But what it does is if you look at it from a different lens, Andrew, say, how much does governance how much overhead does governance have in a lot of these things?
Yeah.
And the rules and regulations that council have to adhere to from, say, a health and safety aspect as opposed to a regular business. And
Yeah.
you'd find a good example of that would be going right back to COVID, where we had to take additional precautions as a council because of the potential for what would happen from a health and safety aspect to our clients or customers or whatever you like to call them, ratepayers. So, say another good example of that would be, say, Ocean Spa. So through not necessarily the best management, we got that back in house to try and make that a little bit more of a better facility. But of course, the requirements for a territorial authority we needed more, from a health and safety aspect, we needed more lifeguards there than they were before, because they were running very, very lean shifts. So it's little things like that where we can go, well, okay, if we can try and maybe, it's almost like a ring fencing, Andrew, of sorts, for those that don't necessarily know about CCTOs or CCTOs. So it's just a ring fencing of that to then allow from a community perspective, it doesn't change much from, say, for instance, a lot of people would say worry about whether or not an asset would be sold from under them. We still have that ability to control that. So we give the CCO or CCTO the direction of what we're after. We give them obviously the KPIs of what we expect, and then have them look after that and do that. So I think it's a case of actually running a business like a business, without the overhead of a lot of the stuff that good example, maybe see what the government was trying to do with Three Waters, the previous government.
Yeah.
Maybe trying to take the house to then deal with it there. It's probably getting a bit deeper than I think the question asked. But yeah, I obviously voted for that. I think that it's a good way of going forward. And I guess time will tell, mate. There's been good examples of successful ones, and there's been equally bad examples of not good ones, or good examples of not good ones.